do completely agree that Hertha should be eligible for a super licence, and I think super licence regulations need to be changed going forward to stop a driver of his ability encountering such a ridiculous hurdle as this. Because are we really saying that a driver who has twice finished in the top 5 in the IndyCar Championship and as high as third in the Championship isn't good enough for Formula 1? Because that is not what the super licence system exists to police.
No, I absolutely agree with that, and it's very important that precedent isn't set to let anyone driver in. That's why I do think you're right, you shouldn't really just go back and retroactively change the points and things, because then suddenly you open the door to people saying this was done in the past for this, and it just doesn't work, and you get the old problem where just about any driver was let in, which isn't good. I do think they should up the points for IndyCar for the future. That's certainly a very good idea. But I think this is one of those things where I don't think you'll find anybody who is sort of serious about what the super licence points are trying to achieve who would argue that Hertha isn't eligible to be an F1 driver. That could be a very good one. That, I think, is the important thing. So it just needs to be done the right way. So we'll see what happens.
A testing deal, but that is something that McLaren needs to let him go from to be able to go and race for another team in Formula 1. All of these things are coming together. And it would just be a massive, massive shame if this hurdle that was never meant to keep a driver like Hertha out of Formula 1 actually does that. And there's I don't know, is it, maybe I have to ask Alanis Morissette this, but is it ironic that Red Bull is now really struggling to get Hertha through the door because of a system that was introduced because of how they brought Verstappen into Formula 1?
Yeah, there's a certain sense of irony in that. There's a double sense of irony because also the whole Verstappen thing was made doubly impossible, not just on the points basis, but on the age basis as well. And it's slightly weird because Verstappen was an exceptional case. He's not the sort of driver that's going to turn up very often. But there was absolutely no problem with Verstappen racing in Formula 1 in 2015. He performed very, very well. So it's funny that that's triggered a problem, and actually I don't think he's the problem in the super licence system. He never was. So it's funny how these things end up joining up, but I think most people would like to see her in Formula 1. I mean, parts of people like to see him carry on in IndyCar.
We will be checking in with Adam Barlow in just a moment to hear about all the week's security news. And don't forget, I am doing a whole other security podcast these days called Seriously Risky Business, and that's the one I do with our very own staffer, Tom Uran. He's also doing his own podcast with the Gruck once a week that gets published into our new Risky Business News RSS feed. So if you want another 5 InfoSec podcasts a week featuring myself, Tom Uran, the Gruck, and Carolyn Kimpanu, just search for Risky Business News in your podcatcher, and you will find it. But yes, news with that in just a moment, and then it will be time for this week's sponsor review. And this week's show is brought to you by CoreLight, the company that maintains the Zig. And yeah, if you need a network sensor for security stuff, particularly one that can operate at an insane scale, you do want to check out CoreLight. But yeah, CoreLight's Federal CTO, Gene Shaver, joins us in this week's sponsor review to talk about whether or not the White House's executive order on zero trust is actually changing anything. And spoiler alert, it already is. So we talk about a few things in that interview, all around federal government stuff, American federal government stuff, so around for that. Basically, Rob got up at a conference and said, hey, I'm the guy who does the China hacking. So somehow China managed to figure it out. So first of all, the target in this case, right? So this is a joint report by like 360 and various bits of the Chinese government. But it's the Northwestern Polytechnical University. This is the university they're complaining about being owned. This university is already sanctioned by the US government, and if you Google around, you will often find things from this university where they're doing stuff like announcing the latest test results from their hypersonic missile development program, right? Like, geez, why would they be an intelligence target?
Yes, exactly right. What possible bone of contention for aerospace development is there between the United States and China at the moment?
Domestic audience and whip up a bit of some, anti-Yankee outrage within China rather than trying to move the needle outside of China. That's all I can come up with here.
Yeah. This doesn't really feel like signalling, for an international audience. I guess there's a little bit as well. The US have been, putting out documentation about some, Chinese state hackers and, sticking their faces on wanted posters and stuff. So there's a little bit of, maybe tit for tat, but yeah, it very much feels like domestic audience stuff rather than something that we, on the Western InfoSec Twitters would take seriously and do anything other than just laugh up uproariously at.
Yeah, well, thus concludes the uproarious laughing at and let's move on to some other news. We've got a bit of a ransomware section.
Obviously, disruption of energy in Europe is pretty topical at the moment. So, anything that has potential to be, in those places in advance, or even if it is just ransomware, stealing some data, either way, pretty important when energy sector is under such pressure there. It does sound like a bunch of data got nicked, but, we don't really know a whole heap beyond that and what the actual impact is.
Well, it's really hard to keep up these days. And we've got some more detail on a ransomware attack that picked up a bit of interest on Twitter a couple of weeks ago involving a UK water supply company. Owned them, and I think initially they were publishing screen, arguing for it for years that SIGINT agencies, etc., should probably take this stuff. The cyber parts should probably do a bit more about this in terms of combating these types of organisations, and I think this is just one of those stories where you think, geez, how is this tolerable?
Yes, it's just not agreed, and the hounds should once again be released.
Yes, late developing story, the IHG hotel group apparently is being ransomware right now, but that is causing a lot of disruption, like no one can book anything, like their systems are down, it's a real mess. But I gotta say, it's nice to see a ransomware crew attacking a hotel reservation system instead of an APT crew.
Yeah, that's a nice change. I mean, obviously the APT crew is in there probably mad because all of their, intelligence is now being locked up as well.
Well, they're going to get incident response.
Right? They're going to get responded, and so those attackers, the crypto locker people who are in there, like, you're messing with active intelligence gathering right there. Like, think about national interest, geez.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the FBI and CISA have released an alert saying that ransomware attack is going to target more K-12 schools and school districts in the United States. So yeah, this is a long way of saying scumbags are still scumbags doing scumbag stuff.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
We could fill the whole show with stories of specific scumbags, but that's just normal now.
Yeah. Oh, and there's QNAP NAS devices that people connect. Kiwi Farms has been booted, but they still host a whole bunch of other hate sites, right? And this idea that critics expect Cloudflare to do detailed moderation because they say, oh, well, we can't be expected to moderate this. We provide connectivity to half the internet. No one expects them to do that, but maybe having a staffer once a month sit down and go, okay, let's have a look at which major hate sites we're hosting and maybe kick them might be a good idea.
Yeah, I think even if it was let's throw the worst, 0.05% of our customers off the platform every month, that seems like good housekeeping. Go out and sweep your front yard, Cloudflare,
But that's the thing, it's ideological for them. They say that it's a freedom of speech issue and that it's important to provide hosting to these people. Meanwhile, Kiwi Farms gets kicked off. They wind up with DDoS Guard, which is Russian, and they kicked them off and said, well, we don't want these guys, what are you crazy?
Yeah. I do struggle with them coming out and saying, trying to compare themselves to a phone company when, but they said, just like the phone company doesn't terminate your line if you say awful, racist, bigoted things, blah, 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 blah. And it's they are providing a very different service to being a phone company. It just makes me super angry when they use those kinds of fallacious arguments.
But that's all they have.
Justify their position.
That's all they have. I mean, they provide service. God, I mean...
I want this person's house a brick thrown through the window in, Ireland or wherever it happens to be, and then a local service provider, will do so for a few €1,000 or whatever it is. And, I mean, it is a disturbing kind of element, but also, a natural consequence of, of a much broader applicability of cybercrime, to more general criminals. And so, if you've got money, you've got people who are willing to do this kind of stuff, and probably better it's happening on Telegram than it is on one of the old school crime underground forums, the Silk Roads or whoever else. But seeing the stuff spilling out into the real world and concerning that it might end up being taken up more broadly by the underground, it's not a great place to be.
No, it's not. But it's a it's a hell of a read. So I'd recommend people click through on that one in this week's show notes. So Project Raven. This was the program in the United Arab Emirates where there was a bunch of ex-NSA people doing surveillance for the government there, and it was all pretty sketchy. Chris Bing and some of his colleagues at Reuters cracked this wide open back in 2019. We've seen a bit of movement on that story, Adam, involving a settlement between the US government and some of these former NSA staffers who were doing the work.
Yes, the State Department has announced that 3 of the people involved in this are now banned for a number of years from working on any...
More Microsoft technique here. I just thought this was kind of interesting. Someone has taken a look at this Windows 11 automation tool called Windows Power Automate, and how to do bad stuff with it. What did you think of this one?
Yeah, this is a really interesting story, not because it's surprising, I guess, in terms of technique. This is Microsoft has an automation tool. Post-intrusion, you can do it. You use it to do stuff, right? That's no surprise, no different than when they introduced PowerShell. But what's interesting here is that people's understanding of what's their computer and what's not, doesn't match with the reality of it. This is a system whereby, in Windows 11, you can automate fleets of computers to do stuff in the cloud, and essentially Microsoft has built, large-scale command and control infrastructure for bots as a service built into the operating system, and so you can register a Windows computer that you've compromised to your, Microsoft Power Automate account in the cloud, and then just send it commands and use it for whatever else that you like. And there's living off the land, and PowerShell was great for that. We took a few generations of PowerShell before Microsoft, added some controls to allow admins to, either see the scripts that were being executed and monitor it or block it or whatever else. And this is kind of where we are with this cloud automation for Windows. It's going to take people a while to realize that, they are not using one computer anymore. They are using the Microsoft Cloud mainframe, and they have a dumb Windows terminal on their desk. And people can use that to do whatever the hell they want. So great research. There's some confusion that it's a post-intrusion automation tool being used for exactly what it's intended for. So a little bit, some of the write-ups are not great in that respect. But I think if you're a pen tester, red teamer, admin, understanding what's going to come down the pipe when you roll Windows 11 everywhere is probably good to come across. And probably genuinely useful for sysadmin.
Well, I mean, I got the PowerShell vibes, right? Like off this, it's the same. You know, I know pen testers who these days, they have to worry about, well, you know, are we about to hit a fixed canary when they're post-compromised, right? So there's always that like nervous moment when they're about to do something to see if they're going to get snapped, and now they can't even run Who Am I without worrying that it's, you know, that it's wrench hacked to send an alert to the SOC, right? So
yeah, it's the worst.
It's fun stuff. We've got a write-up from Dan Gooden here, which is a bit of a deep dive on the crew that's, or individual maybe, that's been behind some of these supply chain attacks on PyPy, just doing trash like crypto miner stuff. But, you know, a bit of interesting background here.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the sort of evolution of, you know, this set of malware, which apparently has some ties to like Robux, the current in-game currency, and Roblox scams and that kind of thing, and see it escalating from, you know, typo squatting to account compromise, you know, into PyPy, and then kind of more sophisticated supply chain stuff. And it does kind of feel like a one-person, you know, sort of operation. But yeah, interesting to see that, you know, is sort of scaling up in complexity and reach.
Australia-based journalist Jeremy Kirk has a good write-up in Data Breach Today about one of these, you know, one-time password phishing, you know, real-time phishing proxies. He's got a great write-up on one that's been dubbed Evil Proxy here. This is just, you know, another example of why we need FIDO-Auth, right, and why the shift is actually on for real, because these phishing kits are really good now. They make one-time passwords basically useless, and, you know, it's over, basically. But this is yet another example of why that is so.
Yeah, it's a great example, this one, of the, you know, crime underground innovating and making something that used to be really
minute wired, and zeroes in on some semantic research, which is pretty interesting, looking at the prevalence of hard-coded auth credentials in apps, right? And this is a problem. I actually had a call earlier this week with Dylan from Trufflehog, and he runs the company around that TruffleSec, and they do secrets discovery. And yeah, this is a problem, right? Like the amount of just secrets out there, whether they're hard-coded creds, whether they're you know, API keys, things like that. This is something that we hoped would get better over time, but unfortunately just the proliferation of software everywhere eating the world means that, yeah, this is still an issue, and this is a good write-up on a part of that.
Yeah, this is you know, it's a real problem at scale. Like, we're building software so quickly, and there's so many apps for everything, and so many APIs for everything, and the cloud authentication model is still complicated and new and different in every case. And, you know, if you're an app developer, getting to the point where you need to understand the plumbing of how every authentication thing works and what a particular token grants and so on, like, that's really complicated. And this is, in most cases, app developers using SDKs for other services or APIs for other services, and, you know, they don't have time to stop and think about what some third-party API they use, how they've structured their AWS, you know, permission models, and whether their keys are meaningful. So, you know, it may not be data that you care about at all. And some of the examples they've come up with are, you know, where, you know, there's some third-party service, you know, and it's effectively, you know, not multi-tenanted, and so you've got, you know, one app that uses some, you know, like AI, speech transcription service, shall we say, and that key gets you access to every customer's data that traverses those systems, because, yeah, no one's got time to understand how their cloud supply.
And this is a good way to get them. This is a really good way to get them, and I feel like security tooling isn't really good at spotting malicious JavaScript in browser extensions that are going to be able to get that job done for the attacker. So I feel like the reason this is worth talking about is we haven't seen too many serious attacks using it. Like, we've seen malicious browser extensions used in a post-compromise scenario. Someone gets on the box, they might even throw up the extension in some sort of hidden way, and then that'll start, you know, sending cookies off to the attacker. But in this case, we're just seeing stuff that was like actually in the Chrome store or whatever the hell they call it, you know, doing malicious things. So I feel like this is a bit of a gap in security tooling that's probably going to cause us some drama at some point. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, I agree completely. I've always kind of, you know, now that the browser is the operating system, Chrome extension, browser extensions are kind of like kernel modules, right? They're kind of like you wouldn't go and run some random kernel module from the internet and stick it in the middle of
Niche things that I need for what I do, and it's, oh boy, makes me a little nervous, now we've got an obituary to get through. Sadly, Peter Eckersley, who was the co-creator of Let's Encrypt, has passed away, aged 43. Tremendously sad, apparently. I believe he had been diagnosed with cancer, and there was some, what's been described as pre-op complications or something, all happened very, very quickly. And so Vale Peter Eckersley, who, certainly made an impact.
Yes, he really is a long-time contributor to so many interesting projects around crypto and for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The fact that Let's Encrypt and the changes in the SSL and the CA ecosystems have been so positive over the last few years. I mean, it's obviously still trashy, but it's way better than it used to be when you had to pay